Economy boarding is back there, sweetheart. This area is for paying customers.
The words sliced through the morning air at gate B27 like a blade through silk. Captain Ryan Mitchell didn't bother looking at the woman's face. He looked at her hoodie. He looked at her worn jeans. He looked at her dark skin. 3 strikes. She was out before she even stepped up to bat. Mitchell didn't know that the woman he was about to humiliate owned 64% of Skyline Airways as of yesterday's $4.2 billion acquisition. He didn't know that in exactly 27 minutes she would end his career with 2 words: "You're fired." But right now, standing in the bustling concourse of Denver International Airport at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning, Captain Ryan Mitchell was king of his domain. And kings, as he saw it, didn't share space with peasants. Before we dive into this story of high-altitude justice, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, because this tale of karma at 30,000 feet is about to take off. And if you believe that respect should be universal, regardless of what someone's wearing, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The woman standing in the priority boarding area was Diana Carter, though Mitchell would have laughed if someone had told him her name. To him, she was just another problem passenger trying to game the airlines. Her Stanford University hoodie was oversized and faded, the kind of gray that comes from too many late nights and too much coffee. Her black leggings had seen better days, and her hair was pulled back into the kind of messy bun that screamed exhaustion. Diana adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase, a piece worth more than Mitchell's monthly salary, though its understated design revealed nothing of its true cost. The cracked screen protector on her iPhone told a story of someone too busy changing the world to worry about changing phone accessories. In her other hand, she clutched a travel mug that had seen 4 continents in the past month, coffee stains mapping her journey from boardroom to boardroom. She had every reason to look exhausted. For the past 31 hours, she had been locked in negotiations in Tokyo, hammering out the final details of the largest airline acquisition in aviation history. While Mitchell had been sleeping in his king-size bed in his suburban Denver home, Diana had been reshaping the industry that employed him. But he didn't know that. All he saw was a black woman in casual clothes standing where she didn't belong. Diana had chosen this appearance deliberately. As the new majority owner of Skyline Airways, she wanted to observe the company culture without the pretense that came with power suits and corporate entourages. She wanted to see how Skyline treated passengers when they thought no one important was watching. She was getting her answer. Captain Ryan Mitchell cut an imposing figure as he strode through the terminal. At 54, he carried himself with the rigid bearing of a man who had spent 25 years being saluted and obeyed. His silver hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place despite the early hour. His uniform was immaculate, the 4 gold stripes on his sleeves gleaming under the fluorescent lights like badges of superiority. His jaw was carved from granite and self-importance, and his eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Behind him trailed his crew like an entourage. Jake Thompson, the first officer whose nervous smile suggested he knew something was always wrong but lacked the courage to address it. Emma Walsh, the senior flight attendant whose tension was visible in every step, and 2 junior attendants who looked like they were walking through a minefield. Mitchell was a legend at Skyline Airways, but not for the right reasons. His perfect safety record had made him untouchable despite the 87 complaints filed against him over the years. Sexual harassment, verbal abuse, racial profiling. Each complaint had been buried deeper than the last, filed away in a system designed to protect valuable assets rather than vulnerable people. His reputation among crew members was whispered about in break rooms and crew quarters. Flight attendants requested transfers to avoid working with him. Gate agents dreaded his arrivals. But Mitchell's seniority and skill had created a shield of invincibility around him. As he approached the gate podium, his eyes swept over the waiting passengers with visible disgust. He hated this part of the job, the part where he had to share space with what he privately called the cattle. His gaze landed on Diana standing near the entrance to the jet bridge, checking emails on her phone. She wasn't in his way, but she was in his sight line. And in Mitchell's world, that was enough. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He didn't say, "Pardon me." He simply walked straight toward her, his stride deliberate and aggressive, forcing her to stumble backward to avoid a collision. Her coffee sloshed over the rim of her mug, the hot liquid splashing across her hand. "Ouch," Diana hissed, shaking her hand reflexively. She looked up, expecting an apology, the basic courtesy any decent human being would offer. Mitchell stopped. He turned slowly, looking down at her with the expression of someone who had just stepped in something unpleasant. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hoodie, then her leggings. Then he let out a sharp, derisive breath through his nose, a sound that conveyed more contempt than words ever could. "The economy line starts back there, sweetheart." Mitchell said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried across the gate area like a public announcement. He pointed a manicured finger toward the chaotic mass of passengers near the back wall, his gesture as dismissive as a king banishing a peasant. "Zone 5, the zoo. Go find your place." Diana blinked, wiping the hot coffee from her hand onto her leggings. She was bone-tired, running on 4 hours of sleep in the past 3 days, and the last thing she needed was some authoritarian pilot playing dress code police. But something in his tone, the casual cruelty of it, sparked a familiar fire in her chest. "I'm fine where I am." "Thanks," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an undertone of steel that Mitchell was too arrogant to recognize. His eyes narrowed. In his 25 years of flying passengers in hoodies, didn't talk back to captains in uniforms. They apologized. They shuffled away. They knew their place. "You're cluttering the priority lane," he said, his voice growing louder, more theatrical. "This area is for first-class and business-class passengers, people who pay my salary not for standbys hoping to snag an empty seat." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several passengers turned to look, their conversations pausing as they sensed the tension building. Sofia Rodriguez, the young gate agent behind the counter, felt her stomach clench. She had worked this gate for 2 years and had seen Mitchell's performances before. "I'm not a standby," Diana said, meeting his gaze directly. Her eyes were dark and sharp, a stark contrast to her slouchy clothing. And for a moment, Mitchell felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by his familiar arrogance. "Could have fooled me," Mitchell muttered, his voice just loud enough for the businessman behind him to hear and chuckle appreciatively. The validation fed his confidence like oxygen feeds fire. "Look, sweetheart, just move out of the way," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "When we start boarding the cheap seats, I'm sure they'll call your group number. Probably group last." He turned his back on her with theatrical finality, dismissing her as completely as if she had ceased to exist. He walked up to Sofia at the gate counter, his demeanor shifting to authoritative command. "Let's get this show on the road, Chloe." He barked deliberately, using the wrong name because he couldn't be bothered to remember a gate agent's identity. "I want wheels up on time. Don't let the riffraff clog up the jet bridge." Diana watched him go, feeling that familiar burn in her chest, the one she had carried through countless boardrooms where men like Mitchell assumed she was the catering staff or someone's assistant. She reached into her pocket and fingered her boarding pass, first-class seat 2A, purchased at full price because she preferred to pay her own way. She could have said something then. Could have pulled out her ID, shown her credentials, watched his smug expression crumble. But Diana Carter, the newly appointed majority owner of Skyline Airways and the woman currently flying to Miami to decide whether to liquidate Mitchell's entire division, decided to wait. She wanted to see exactly who Captain Ryan Mitchell was when he thought no one of consequence was watching. She wanted to document every word, every gesture, every revelation of character that occurred when he believed himself safe from accountability. Because Diana Carter had learned long ago that the most important moments in business, in life, in justice happened when people thought no one important was paying attention. and she was about to prove that someone was always watching. Diana Carter's story began in a two-bedroom apartment in Detroit, where the American dream seemed more like a cruel joke than an achievable goal. Her mother, Rosa Carter, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, cleaning offices downtown from midnight to 6 a.m., stocking shelves at a grocery store from 8 to 4, and babysitting neighborhood kids in the evenings. Diana learned to do homework by the light of a single lamp, while her mother counted tips in quarters and dimes. The first time Diana experienced discrimination that would shape her future happened when she was 7 years old. Rosa had taken her to a fancy department store downtown, saving for months to buy Diana a dress for her elementary school graduation. They had walked through the gleaming aisles, Diana's eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful displays, when a security guard approached. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your receipt for that purse," he had said to Rosa, who was carrying a battered handbag that was clearly years old. "This is my purse," Rosa had replied quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her cheeks. "I'm going to need to check that." The guard insisted, his hand moving to his radio. Even at 7, Diana understood what was happening. She watched her mother open her purse with dignity intact, showing that it contained nothing but a few crumpled bills, some loose change, and Diana's school permission slips. The guard's face reddened when he realized his mistake, but he offered no apology. That night, Rosa sat Diana down at their kitchen table and said words that would echo through every achievement of her daughter's life. "Baby girl, some people will look at your skin and think they know your story. They'll think they know what you're capable of, what you deserve, where you belong. Your job isn't to change their minds. Your job is to prove them wrong so thoroughly that they can never forget it." Diana carried those words through her full scholarship to Stanford, where she was one of only 12 black students in her MBA program. She carried them through her first job at Goldman Sachs, where senior partners consistently mistook her for someone's assistant. She carried them through the night she decided to leave corporate America and start her own investment firm with a $50,000 loan from a community bank that believed in her vision when no one else would. Carter Global Acquisitions had grown from a one-woman operation in a shared office space to a multi-billion-dollar empire that reshaped industries. Diana specialized in identifying companies with strong fundamentals but toxic cultures, purchasing them and transforming them into places where talent thrived regardless of background. Her reputation was built on 3 principles: thorough research, decisive action, and unwavering commitment to cultural change. When Diana Carter acquired a company, employees knew their workplace was about to become either much better or much different. There was never a middle ground. The acquisition of Skyline Airways had been in development for 8 months. Diana's research team had identified it as an airline with excellent safety records and strong route networks, but with a culture problem that was hemorrhaging both talent and customer loyalty. Anonymous employee surveys revealed patterns of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation that created a hostile environment for anyone who wasn't part of the Old Boys network. The final negotiations in Tokyo had been brutal, lasting 31 hours straight, as Skyline's board attempted to retain control while Diana methodically dismantled their defensive strategies. When the signatures were finally in place, she owned 64% of an airline that didn't yet know it was about to undergo revolutionary change. She had chosen to fly commercially on Skyline's own aircraft as her first act as majority owner. No private jet, no corporate entourage, no advance notice to staff. She wanted to experience the company culture as a regular passenger, to see firsthand how employees treated customers when they thought no executives were watching. Captain Ryan Mitchell's story was a masterclass in how institutions could enable toxic behavior when talent overshadowed character. He had joined Skyline Airways 25 years earlier as a young, ambitious pilot with an impeccable flight record and dangerous ego. His problems started early. During his 3rd year, 2 female flight attendants filed complaints about inappropriate comments he made during flights. Mitchell had called them overly sensitive and suggested they couldn't handle the pressure of aviation. The complaints were filed away with notes about his old-school communication style that needed minor adjustments. By year 8, passenger complaints began appearing. A black businessman reported that Mitchell had questioned his first-class ticket repeatedly, suggesting it might be fraudulent. A Hispanic family claimed he had made comments about language barriers affecting flight safety. Each complaint was investigated, deemed unsubstantiated, and buried in personnel files that grew thicker but never resulted in meaningful consequences. Year 15 brought the watershed moment that should have ended Mitchell's career. 3 female crew members requested transfers to avoid working with him after incidents ranging from inappropriate touching to verbal sexual harassment. Instead of disciplining, Mitchell Skyline's management quietly accommodated the transfers and offered the women alternative assignments that amounted to lateral career damage. The pattern became self-reinforcing. Mitchell's perfect safety record and strong union representation created a protective barrier around him. Managers who tried to address his behavior were told he was too valuable to lose and just needed better coaching on interpersonal skills. The coaching never materialized, but the complaints kept coming. By year 20, Mitchell had developed a systematic approach to psychological intimidation. He had learned to be just subtle enough to avoid formal discipline while being brutal enough to establish dominance. He called economy passengers cattle and cargo in crew briefings. He made jokes about upgrading the gene pool when expensive flights carried mostly white passengers. He treated flight attendants like servants and gate agents like obstacles to his personal convenience. His behavior created a culture of fear that extended far beyond his immediate crew. Flight attendants warned each other about Mitchell flights. Gate agents dreaded his arrivals. Passengers complained about the hostile atmosphere on flights he commanded, though they rarely connected it to the captain they barely saw. Mitchell had grown comfortable in his untouchability. His seniority made him nearly impossible to fire. His safety record made him valuable to the company. His union representation made discipline complicated and expensive. He had created a perfect storm of institutional protection that allowed him to treat people however he wanted without meaningful consequences. Until today, Sofia Rodriguez represented everything Mitchell despised about modern aviation. At 28, she was young enough to represent changing demographics in the industry. As a Hispanic woman, she embodied the diversity initiatives he openly mocked. As someone with a college degree and ambitions beyond gate services, she threatened his assumptions about who deserved respect in the aviation hierarchy. Sofia had been working at Gate B-27 for 2 years, long enough to recognize the signs of incoming trouble when she saw Mitchell's crew approaching. She had witnessed his performances before the theatrical put-downs. The casual cruelty, the way he turned passenger humiliation into entertainment for anyone willing to laugh along. Her hands trembled slightly as she pretended to focus on her computer terminal. Sofia knew that Mitchell's targets were usually passengers who couldn't fight back elderly travelers, young families, anyone who looked different or dressed casually. She had never seen him target someone who responded with the quiet confidence Diana Carter was displaying, and it made her nervous. Sofia was a single mother working her way through a business degree at night school. She couldn't afford to lose this job, couldn't risk the confrontation that came with challenging a senior captain. But watching Diana stand her ground awakened something in Sofia that she had been suppressing for 2 years, the knowledge that silence in the face of injustice made her complicit in perpetuating it. Jake Thompson had been Mitchell's first officer for 3 years, long enough to know that his captain's behavior was wrong, but not long enough to develop the courage to challenge it. At 35, Jake was ambitious enough to want advancement, but insecure enough to fear making enemies of powerful people. He had learned to laugh at Mitchell's jokes, nod at his inappropriate comments, and look the other way when passengers were treated poorly. It was a survival strategy that had worked so far, keeping him in good standing with someone who could either advance or destroy his career with a single evaluation report. But Jake had been growing uncomfortable with the moral compromises his career required. His wife had started asking questions about the stories he came home with, the casual cruelty he described as normal workplace behavior. His teenage daughter had recently announced her intention to become a pilot, and Jake found himself imagining her working in environments like the one he helped perpetuate every day. The woman in the hoodie was looking at Mitchell with an expression Jake had never seen directed at his captain, complete fearlessness. It unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate, suggesting possibilities he had never considered about what happened when people refused to be intimidated. Emma Walsh had been a flight attendant for 15 years, long enough to remember when aviation felt more like hospitality than warfare. She had watched the industry's culture deteriorate, had seen respect replaced with aggression, had witnessed too many passengers treated like criminals for the crime of existing while different. She knew Mitchell's reputation, had worked flights where his behavior created tension that lasted the entire journey, had seen passengers leave skyline flights looking shaken and humiliated, vowing never to fly the airline again, had watched colleagues request reassignments rather than confront a system that protected bullies and punished those who challenged them. Emma was tired of being complicit in behavior that violated everything she believed about treating people with dignity. She was tired of smiling apologetically at passengers while doing nothing to address the source of their mistreatment. She was tired of being part of a system that turned a blind eye to cruelty as long as it was profitable. The woman Mitchell was targeting looked different from his usual victims. She wasn't backing down, wasn't apologizing for existing, wasn't giving him the submission he demanded. Emma found herself hoping that someone would finally stand up to Mitchell in a way that mattered, that would create consequences he couldn't dismiss or ignore. Marcus Rivera, 24 years old and traveling home to Miami for spring break from college, sat in seat 3C with his phone already recording. As a digital media major, he recognized compelling content when he saw it. But more importantly, as someone who had experienced discrimination himself, he recognized injustice worth documenting. Marcus had grown up in a household where his parents taught him to be aware of authority figures who abused their power. His father was a police officer who had spent his career fighting corruption within his own department. His mother was a teacher who had challenged institutional bias in educational settings. They had raised Marcus to understand that cultural change started with individual courage to document and expose wrongdoing. He watched the scene unfolding between the pilot and the woman with growing anger and fascination. The pilot's behavior was textbook discrimination assumptions based on appearance abuse of positional authority, deliberate humiliation designed to establish dominance. The woman's response was equally textbook resistance, calm, dignified, refusing to accept disrespectful treatment. Marcus began live streaming without announcing it, knowing that whatever was about to happen needed to be preserved and shared. He had 50,000 followers across various social platforms, enough to ensure that compelling content could reach significant audiences quickly. Patricia Hayes, seated in 1A, was experiencing something she had rarely felt in her 67 years: shame about her own privilege and the ways she had used it. As a wealthy widow who flew first class regularly, she had grown accustomed to being treated with deference, to having her comfort prioritized over other passengers' basic dignity. She had witnessed scenes like this before: pilots, gate agents, and flight attendants treating passengers poorly based on appearance or perceived social status. She had always looked away, told herself it wasn't her business, convinced herself that intervening would only make things worse. But something about this particular confrontation felt different. The pilot's behavior was so egregiously inappropriate, so obviously driven by prejudice, that Patricia found herself unable to look away or rationalize inaction. The woman being targeted carried herself with a dignity that reminded Patricia of her own daughter, who had dedicated her career to civil rights law before dying young in a car accident. Patricia began to understand that her silence in previous situations had made her complicit in perpetuating a culture where discrimination thrived. She reached for her iPad, not yet sure what she intended to do, but knowing that bearing witness was the minimum responsibility of decent people when they encountered injustice. The stage was set. The players were in position, and Diana Carter was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is patience. The strategic decision to let someone reveal their true character completely before revealing your own power to do something about it. Mitchell thought he was dealing with just another passenger who needed to learn her place. He was actually facing someone who was about to teach him about consequences for the first time in his career. The lesson was about to begin. The first wave of humiliation was designed to be public, theatrical, and devastating. Captain Mitchell turned away from the gate counter and surveyed the boarding area like a general reviewing troops. His eyes found Diana again, still standing calmly near the priority boarding lane, and his expression shifted into something predatory. "This is exactly what's wrong with air travel today," Mitchell announced, his voice projecting across the gate area like a performer addressing an audience. "People who don't know their place making things difficult for real passengers." The words were carefully chosen weapons. Real passengers implied that Diana was somehow artificial, illegitimate, undeserving. Don't know their place carried the weight of generations of discrimination. The suggestion that social hierarchies were natural and challenges to them were inappropriate. Several passengers turned to look conversations, pausing as the drama unfolded. A businessman in a navy suit smirked, enjoying the show. A family with young children shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension but unsure of its source. An elderly couple exchanged concerned glances. Diana remained motionless, her expression neutral. "Sir, I have a valid boarding pass for this flight," she said, her voice carrying the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with unreasonable people. "Let me guess," Mitchell replied, stepping closer to her with deliberate aggression. "Employee standby. Buddy pass voucher from some complaint you filed." Each suggestion was an insult disguised as a question. Employee standby implied she worked in some menial position for the airline. Buddy passes suggested she was dependent on others' charity. Complaint vouchers implied she was a troublemaker who gamed the airlines for free flights. "I'm not a standby," Diana replied evenly. Her refusal to rise to his bait seemed to frustrate him, and his voice grew louder. "Could have fooled me," he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. A businessman behind him chuckled appreciatively, and Mitchell's confidence swelled with the validation. "Look, sweetheart," he said, the condescending endearment dripping with contempt. "Just move out of the way. When we start boarding the cheap seats, I'm sure they'll call your group number. Probably group last." Sofia Rodriguez felt her stomach clench as she watched from behind the gate counter. She had seen Mitchell's performances before, but never quite this aggressive, never this publicly humiliating. Her hands shook slightly as she pretended to focus on her computer screen, torn between her duty to maintain professionalism and her growing urge to intervene. Jake Thompson stood behind Mitchell, his nervous smile frozen in place. He recognized the signs of his captain building toward one of his more dramatic displays of authority. Jake had learned to stay quiet during these moments, to let Mitchell's behavior play out without interference. But something about this situation felt different. The woman wasn't retreating or apologizing as Mitchell's usual targets did. Diana watched Mitchell's performance with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years studying toxic workplace cultures. She recognized the pattern: establish dominance through public humiliation, escalate until the target submitted or fought back, then use either response to justify further aggression. She also recognized that Mitchell was creating exactly the kind of documented behavior that would make his termination legally bulletproof. Round 2 began when Mitchell decided that Diana's calm responses were insufficient entertainment for his growing audience. "You know what he said?" his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used for safety briefings. "I think we need to verify some things here." He gestured toward Sophia with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sophia called TSA. "I want this woman's documents verified." The demand hung in the air like a challenge. Several passengers turned to stare more directly, sensing that the confrontation was escalating beyond normal gate drama. A teenage girl in seat 3C began discreetly recording with her phone, instinctively understanding that something significant was happening. "Sir," Sophia replied carefully, her voice barely audible. "Passengers with valid tickets don't require additional screening unless I say they do," Mitchell interrupted sharply. "I've been flying for 25 years. I can spot a fake a mile away." He turned back to Diana with theatrical skepticism. "Those documents could be printed at any Kinko's." The accusation of fraud was serious enough to potentially involve federal authorities, a fact Mitchell understood perfectly. He was deliberately escalating the situation beyond simple passenger conflict into potential criminal investigation, using his authority as captain to weaponize the security apparatus of the airport. Diana reached into her briefcase and pulled out her boarding pass and ID with measured movements. "Here are my documents, Captain. Feel free to examine them." Mitchell took them with 2 fingers, holding them away from his body as if they might contaminate him. He made a show of studying them closely, his expression shifting between skepticism and disdain. "Interesting," he said loudly. "The ID looks legitimate, but these days you can fake anything with the right equipment. The boarding pass, well, we all know how easy it is to manipulate reservations. He was creating a public narrative of suspected fraud without making direct accusations that could be actionably defamatory. It was a practiced form of character assassination that allowed him to destroy someone's reputation while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions." Emma Walsh approached hesitantly from the jet bridge entrance. "Captain Mitchell," she said carefully, "perhaps we should just begin boarding, and perhaps you should focus on your own responsibilities instead of questioning mine," Mitchell snapped without looking at her. His dismissal of the senior flight attendant was swift and public, designed to reinforce his absolute authority in the situation. Diana watched the interaction with interest, cataloging each instance of abusive behavior toward his own crew members. She understood that Mitchell's treatment of her was part of a larger pattern of workplace toxicity that extended to every relationship he controlled. "Sir," she said calmly, "you're interfering with the legitimate travel of a paying passenger based on assumptions about my appearance. That's textbook discrimination." The word discrimination landed like a bomb in the conversation. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that they were witnessing something more serious than standard airline drama. A man in a business suit pulled out his phone and began recording discreetly. Mitchell's face reddened with anger at having his behavior labeled accurately. "Discrimination," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't discrimination, sweetheart. This is experience. Pattern recognition. I know trouble when I see it." The response revealed everything about his mindset. Pattern recognition was a euphemism for racial profiling. "I know trouble when I see it" suggested that Diana's appearance automatically categorized her as problematic. "And what exactly do you see when you look at me?" Diana asked, her voice remaining level despite the increasingly hostile environment. Mitchell paused, realizing that any honest answer would expose the prejudices driving his behavior. "I see someone who's trying to game the airlines," he said finally. "Someone who thinks they can dress however they want and demand first-class treatment." The response was revealing in its specificity. Mitchell was explicitly connecting Diana's casual clothing to her worthiness for respectful treatment, suggesting that dress codes determined who deserved basic dignity. A woman in her 60s, seated nearby, began to look visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. An elderly man shook his head in obvious disapproval. The businessman who had chuckled earlier was no longer smiling, recognizing that the situation had moved beyond entertainment into something uglier. Round 3 brought physical intimidation, as Mitchell decided that verbal humiliation wasn't sufficient to establish his dominance. "You know what he said," stepping closer to Diana, until he was invading her personal space. I don't like your attitude. Passengers with bad attitudes don't fly on my aircraft. He was using his height and physical presence as weapons looming over her in a display of masculine dominance designed to make her feel small and vulnerable. His uniform added to the intimidation factor, suggesting that his authority was backed by institutional power. Diana didn't step back or show any sign of being intimidated. "You're interfering with a legitimate passenger's travel," she repeated calmly. "Your behavior is being recorded by multiple witnesses." The mention of recording seemed to enrage Mitchell further. "Oh, so now you're threatening me," he said loudly. "Making recordings to post on social media, probably edit to make me look bad." His response revealed his awareness that his behavior was indefensible if captured accurately. The suggestion that any recording would need to be edited to make him look bad implied that his unedited behavior was already problematic. Emma Walsh approached again, her distress visible. "Captain, perhaps I should call the gate supervisor to..." "To what?" Mitchell snapped. "To tell me how to do my job. To let passengers dictate policy." "I don't think so." His dismissal of the suggestion to involve supervision revealed his confidence that institutional authority would support him regardless of his behavior. It also demonstrated his assumption that any challenge to his conduct would be viewed as inappropriate rather than necessary. Jake Thompson finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Cap, maybe we should just let the lady board if she has a valid ticket." Mitchell turned on his first officer with frightening intensity. "Maybe you should remember who's in command here," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Maybe you should remember that questioning my judgment in public is insubordination." The threat was clear challenge, Mitchell's behavior, and face professional retaliation. Jake's face went pale as he recognized that his captain was willing to destroy crew members who didn't support his discrimination. Diana observed the interaction with growing interest. Mitchell was deliberately revealing the culture of fear and retaliation that allowed his behavior to persist unchallenged. Every response he made was creating more evidence of a hostile work environment that extended far beyond passenger treatment. Round 4 escalated to direct character assassination as Mitchell decided to destroy Diana's reputation in front of as many witnesses as possible. "You see this?" he announced to the waiting passengers, gesturing toward Diana like she was evidence in a court case. "This is why flights get delayed. People who don't know their place, who try to cause scenes for attention." He was attempting to turn the waiting passengers into allies by framing Diana as the source of their inconvenience. It was a calculated strategy to isolate her by making other people view her as the problem rather than his discrimination as the issue. "I bet she's planning to drink the free champagne and cause a scene," he continued, his voice carrying across the gate area. "Probably live stream herself being oppressed for social media attention." The air quotes around oppressed were particularly revealing, suggesting that Mitchell believed discrimination was either fictional or exaggerated for personal gain. His prediction that Diana would cause a scene was projection, given that he was the one creating drama through his behavior. "You can always tell the troublemakers," Jake Thompson added weakly, trying to support his captain while clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "And how exactly can you tell?" Diana asked her question directed to both men, but her eyes fixed on Mitchell. Mitchell smirked, confident that he had successfully framed the narrative. "Experience, sweetheart. 25 years of dealing with passengers teaches you to read people." "It's not reading people," Diana replied calmly. "It's making assumptions based on superficial characteristics. That's the definition of prejudice." Her response was clinically accurate and publicly stated, making it impossible for Mitchell to deny the nature of his behavior without appearing foolish. Several passengers nodded slightly in agreement, recognizing the truth in her observation. Mitchell's face reddened further. "Listen here," he said, his voice rising to near shouting level. "I've had enough of your attitude. You're not boarding this aircraft. Find another flight. The declaration was both an abuse of authority and a violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. As Captain Mitchell had broad discretion over passenger removal, but not when the decision was based on prohibited characteristics like race or the passenger's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment. Sofia Rodriguez finally found her voice. "Captain Mitchell," she said carefully, "the passenger has valid documents and hasn't violated any regulations." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Mitchell snapped. "Do your job and let me do mine." His dismissal of the gate agent was automatic and revealing, demonstrating his habitual disrespect for anyone he considered beneath him in the workplace hierarchy. Round 5 brought the nuclear option as Mitchell decided to involve law enforcement in his personal vendetta. "You know what he said?" Pulling out his phone with theatrical authority. "I'm calling airport security. This passenger is being disruptive and needs to be removed from the gate area." The threat to involve police was an escalation designed to terrify Diana into compliance. Mitchell understood that most people, particularly people of color, would rather submit to humiliation than risk police involvement at an airport. Diana's expression didn't change. "You're calling security because I calmly stated that I have valid travel documents," she asked. "I'm calling security because you're causing a disturbance and threatening crew members." Mitchell replied, his ability to reframe reality in real time demonstrating years of practice at avoiding accountability for his actions. "When did I threaten anyone?" Diana asked her question, directed to the growing audience of passengers who had been witnessing the entire interaction. Several people shook their heads, indicating they had heard no threats. The teenage girl with the phone called out, "She never threatened anyone. She's been totally calm." Mitchell ignored the witness testimony, dialing airport security with exaggerated urgency. "Yes, this is Captain Mitchell on Skyline Flight 1247. I need someone at Gate B27 immediately. I have a disruptive passenger who needs to be removed." The call was being made in full view of multiple recording devices and witnesses who had observed the entire interaction. Mitchell was creating an official record of his discrimination, while simultaneously demonstrating his confidence that institutional authority would support him regardless of the circumstances. Diana remained perfectly still, her expression calm despite the escalation. "You're going to regret this decision for the rest of your life," she said quietly, her voice carrying a certainty that should have warned Mitchell he was making a catastrophic mistake. Instead, he laughed. "What are you going to do? Tweet about it? File a complaint? Good luck with that." His response revealed his complete confidence in his own invulnerability. In Mitchell's experience, passengers who challenged him were powerless to create meaningful consequences. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses forgot. The airlines protected valuable employees over troublesome customers. He had no idea that he was about to learn the difference between attacking a powerless passenger and attacking someone who owned the aircraft he was standing in. Security was on the way. Phones were recording. Witnesses were watching. And Diana Carter was about to reveal that sometimes the person you're trying to humiliate has the power to end your career with 2 words. The education of Captain Ryan Mitchell was about to begin. Marcus Rivera's thumb had been hovering over the Go Live button for the past 3 minutes, watching the confrontation escalate with the trained eye of someone who understood viral content. As a digital media major with 50,000 followers across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, Marcus recognized compelling content when he saw it, but this was different. This wasn't entertainment. This was documentation of discrimination happening in real time. The live stream notification pinged across his platforms simultaneously. Racist pilot attacking passenger at Denver airport. Going viral now. Within 30 seconds, Marcus had 20 viewers. Within 2 minutes, he had 200. By the time Captain Mitchell finished his call to security, 1,000 people were watching the confrontation unfold live, and the numbers were climbing exponentially. "Y'all seeing this?" Marcus whispered into his phone, adjusting the angle to capture both Mitchell and Diana in the frame. "This pilot is straight up profiling this woman. She's been nothing but calm and professional, and he's treating her like a criminal." The comments section exploded immediately. What the hell is wrong with that pilot? She should sue them into bankruptcy. This is disgusting. Where is this happening? Screen record. This. Everyone. Marcus's notification sounds were pinging constantly as shares and new viewers flooded the stream. He muted his phone but kept talking quietly to his audience. She's got valid tickets, he reported. I watched her show him her ID and boarding pass. He's literally making stuff up because he doesn't like how she looks. The viewer count hit 2,000, then 3,000. Marcus had never seen growth this rapid on any of his content, but he also understood that he was witnessing something historically significant. This wasn't going viral because it was entertaining. It was going viral because it was enraging. Patricia Hayes, seated in 1A with her iPad discreetly angled toward the confrontation, wasn't initially planning to share anything publicly. At 67, she considered herself more of a social media observer than participant. But as Mitchell's behavior grew increasingly outrageous, she found herself opening her Facebook account for the first time in months. Her status update was simple but devastating. Watching a pilot at Denver Airport humiliate a black woman for no reason other than her clothing and skin color. In 2024, on camera. This is happening right now. Patricia's Facebook network consisted primarily of wealthy retirees' country club members and charity organization leaders. These weren't people who typically engaged with social justice content, but they were people who recognized inappropriate behavior when they saw it clearly documented. Within minutes, her post was being shared across networks of influential Denver area residents. The country club crowd wasn't particularly progressive, but they understood reputation propriety and the importance of treating people with basic dignity. Mitchell's behavior violated their standards of acceptable conduct regardless of any political considerations. The comments on Patricia's post reflected the specific outrage of people who had never personally experienced discrimination but could recognize it when presented with clear evidence. This is appalling behavior for any professional. What airline is this? I'll never fly them again. Someone needs to contact the CEO immediately. I'm forwarding this to my son-in-law who works in aviation law, Emma Walsh. The senior flight attendant stood at the jet bridge entrance watching Mitchell's performance with growing horror. She had witnessed his behavior for years, but never had it been so publicly documented, so clearly indefensible, so obviously discriminatory. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Jennifer, another flight attendant. Girl, turn on Marcus Rivera's live stream. Right now. Your captain is about to end his own career on camera. Emma discreetly opened the stream and watched herself appear in the background of Marcus's footage, her body language clearly showing her discomfort with Mitchell's behavior. She realized that her silence was being captured as complicity, that viewers were watching her fail to intervene while her captain methodically humiliated a passenger. The live stream comments were brutal. Why isn't that flight attendant doing anything? She's part of the problem. Speak up. Emma felt sick as she understood that her career-long strategy of staying quiet to avoid Mitchell's retaliation had made her a visible participant in discrimination. She was being judged not just by her colleagues or supervisors, but by thousands of strangers who could see exactly how airline culture protected bad behavior through institutional silence. The hashtag Skyline Discrimination was trending on Twitter within 8 minutes of Marcus starting his live stream. Other passengers had begun posting their own footage from different angles, creating a multi-perspective documentation of events that made any later denial impossible. A business traveler in seat 4D posted a TikTok with the caption, "POV, you're watching a pilot destroy his own career in real time." The video showed Mitchell's increasingly aggressive posturing, his dismissal of his own crew members, his escalating verbal abuse. Sofia Rodriguez felt her phone buzzing constantly in her pocket, but she couldn't look at it while manning the gate. She didn't know that her own nervous energy was being captured in multiple live streams, that viewers could see her hands shaking as she pretended to focus on her computer while her captain created a public relations disaster. What Sophia didn't know was that her name tag was clearly visible in several camera angles, and that viewers were already identifying her as the scared gate agent who was too afraid to do the right thing. Social media was creating individual accountability for everyone present, not just the primary participants. The story was spreading beyond social media into mainstream news within minutes. CNN's iReport received 17 separate submissions of the footage within the first 10 minutes. Local Denver news stations were dispatching camera crews to the airport. Aviation industry journalists were tagging airline executives on Twitter with questions about Skyline's response to the developing scandal. Jake Thompson, standing behind Mitchell with his nervous smile frozen in place, had no idea that his weak attempts to support his captain's discrimination were being captured from multiple angles. His comment about troublemakers was being screen captured and shared as evidence of institutional bias within Skyline's cockpit culture. By the time Mitchell finished his call to security, Skyline scandal was trending nationally. The story had evolved beyond a single incident into a broader conversation about airline culture, workplace harassment, and the enabling of discriminatory behavior through institutional protection. Marcus's live stream had reached 12,000 viewers, but more importantly, dozens of other passengers were now streaming their own perspectives. The gate area had become a multimedia documentation center with every angle of the confrontation being preserved for posterity. The viral mechanics were accelerating beyond anyone's control. Aviation industry groups were sharing the footage with questions about training standards. Civil rights organizations were using the incident as an example of ongoing workplace discrimination. Business leaders were commenting on the importance of corporate culture in protecting brand reputation. Patricia's Facebook post had been shared 400 times within her network of affluent Denver residents, many of whom were Skyline frequent flyers and shareholders. Her social circle represented exactly the demographic that airline executives feared most: wealthy customers with influence and alternatives. The incident was becoming a case study in how social media could create immediate accountability for behavior that might previously have gone unreported or unaddressed. Every person present was being forced to choose their response in real time, knowing that their actions would be preserved and judged by thousands of strangers. Diana remained calm throughout the social media explosion, occasionally glancing at the phones documenting Mitchell's behavior, but showing no emotion about the viral attention. She understood that the court of public opinion was creating evidence that would support any legal action she chose to pursue, but more importantly, that social media was creating cultural pressure for institutional change. Marcus announced to his viewers, 17,000 people watching now. This is history being made. This is how change happens in 2024. He was more right than he knew. The live stream wasn't just documenting Mitchell's discrimination. It was creating a permanent record of how airline culture enabled abusive behavior, how institutional silence protected bad actors, and how individual courage to document injustice could create consequences that traditional complaint systems had failed to deliver. Mitchell finished his call to security completely unaware that he had just ensured his own termination by creating undeniable documentation of workplace abuse. In his arrogance, he had provided his future employer with exactly the evidence needed to fire him for cause without risk of legal challenge. The social media explosion was about to meet the power reveal, and Captain Mitchell was going to learn that in the digital age, discriminatory behavior has immediate, permanent, and devastating consequences. The internet never forgets, and Diana Carter was about to make sure that Mitchell's career ended exactly as publicly as his discrimination had been performed. The moment security arrived at Gate B27, Diana Carter reached into her briefcase with the measured calm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this scenario. Captain Mitchell's smirk broadened as he watched her movements, interpreting them as surrender, as the inevitable capitulation of someone who had finally been called to account for their presumed deception. Finally giving up, Good Mitchell said loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "Take your fake documents and find another airline to scam." Diana's hand emerged from her briefcase holding not a single boarding pass or ID, but a thick folder bound with official seals and legal ribbons. The folder was embossed with the logo of Carter Global Acquisitions, though Mitchell was too arrogant to recognize its significance. "Captain Mitchell." Diana said, her voice carrying a new tone of authority that cut through the gate area noise like a blade through silk. "My name is Diana Carter. I am the managing partner and chief executive officer of Carter Global Acquisitions." The words hung in the air for a moment, their import not immediately registering in Mitchell's self-assured expression. Sofia Rodriguez looked up from her computer terminal, her heart beginning to race as she recognized something momentous was about to happen. As of yesterday's market closing, Diana continued, her voice now projecting with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and reshaping industries. "I own 64% of Skyline Airways." Effectively, Captain Mitchell. "I own this aircraft, this gate, this terminal space, and your employment contract." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Marcus Rivera's live stream viewer count spiked to 25,000 as word spread across social media that something unprecedented was happening. His whispered commentary barely audible. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Did she just say she owns the airline?" Mitchell's brain visibly struggled to process the information. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he looked from Diana's confident expression to the official documents she was now extracting from the folder. His eyes found the acquisition agreement, the shareholder certificates, the corporate resolutions that made her claims undeniably legitimate. That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking like an adolescent's. "You're lying. This is some kind of elaborate fraud." Diana produced a bound copy of the acquisition agreement and held it at chest level, the Skyline Airways logo clearly visible on the cover page alongside Carter Global's corporate seal. "Would you like to examine page 47 where I'm named as majority stakeholder? Or perhaps page 93, which details my authority over personnel decisions?" Sophia's hands had stopped shaking and were now gripping her desk as she realized she was witnessing the most dramatic reversal of power she had ever seen in her life. The scared young woman Captain Mitchell had been terrorizing for 2 years was watching him discover that his latest victim was actually his new boss. Jake Thompson's nervous smile had vanished, entirely replaced by the pallor of someone realizing his career was about to end along with his captain's. His attempts to support Mitchell's discrimination had been captured on multiple live streams watched by tens of thousands of people, including apparently the person who now controlled their employment. "If I had known who you were." Mitchell began, his voice trailing off as the full horror of his situation became clear. Diana's expression turned to steel. "If you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with respect. But because you thought I was poor, because you thought I was powerless, you treated me like garbage." Her voice rose slightly, carrying across the gate area with absolute authority. "Character isn't how you treat your boss, Captain Mitchell. It's how you treat people you think can't do anything for you." She stepped closer to him, and for the first time in the encounter, Mitchell involuntarily stepped backward. "You spent 25 years building a reputation as someone too valuable to discipline. You thought your perfect safety record and union protection made you untouchable." Diana reached into her folder again and withdrew a different document, Mitchell's complete personnel file, thick enough to serve as a weapon. "This contains 87 formal complaints against you, Captain. Sexual harassment, verbal abuse, racial profiling, retaliation against crew members who tried to report your behavior." Mitchell's face had gone from red to gray, sweat beading visibly on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Ms. Carter, please," he gasped, panic overtaking arrogance. "I have a family, a mortgage, kids in college." If I had known... That's exactly the point, Diana interrupted, her voice cutting through his pleading like a judge delivering a verdict. You treated me like dirt because you thought I couldn't fight back. You've spent decades terrorizing passengers and crew members because you thought the airlines would always protect you. She opened his personnel file and began reading aloud, her voice carrying across the gate area where Marcus's live stream was now reaching 40,000 viewers, and multiple news outlets were preparing breaking news reports. Flight Attendant Maria Santos, 2019. Diana read, Captain Mitchell told me I was his little spicy tamale and asked if I got my uniform in the children's department. Mitchell's knees visibly buckled. Several passengers gasped audibly. Passenger Complaint 2021. Diana continued. Captain Mitchell questioned my son's first-class ticket, repeatedly suggesting that children like him belonged in the back of the aircraft. Sofia Rodriguez covered her mouth with her hands, finally understanding the full scope of the monster she had been working alongside for 2 years. Flight Attendant Jennifer Walsh, 2023. Diana read, her voice now carrying across the terminal like a public address announcement. Captain Mitchell cornered me in the galley and told me I could make my job much easier if I was friendlier to him. When I reported the incident, I was transferred to less desirable routes. The documentation was devastating in its specificity and scope. Every complaint Diana read revealed not just individual incidents of harassment, but a pattern of abuse enabled by institutional protection. The airlines had known about Mitchell's behavior for decades and had chosen to protect him rather than his victims. Emma Walsh felt sick as she realized that her own complaints were likely in that file. Her own experiences of harassment and intimidation documented in corporate records that had been ignored for years. The courage she had lacked to confront Mitchell directly was now being displayed by someone with the power to create real consequences. Patricia Hayes reached for her phone to call her son-in-law, an aviation attorney who specialized in employment discrimination. She had the sudden realization that she was witnessing not just individual justice, but potential industry-wide change in how airlines handled discrimination complaints. Diana closed the file and looked directly into Mitchell's eyes. You thought because you could land a plane you didn't have to act like a human being. You thought your technical skills gave you permission to terrorize people who couldn't fight back. She turned slightly to address the growing crowd of passengers and crew members who had gathered to witness the confrontation. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice projecting with the authority of someone accustomed to addressing shareholders and board members. This is what accountability looks like. Captain Ryan Mitchell. She continued, turning back to face him directly. You are terminated immediately. For cause. No severance package, no pension benefits, no references, no consideration for your years of service. The words hit Mitchell like physical blows. He grabbed the nearest handrail to keep from collapsing as the full impact of his situation became clear. You can't, he whispered. I have union protection. I have rights. 25 years of perfect safety records. Amanda Foster. Diana's corporate attorney, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward with a legal briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund most people's retirement. You violated the morality clause in your employment contract 47 times, she said crisply, her voice carrying the precision of someone who specialized in making legal problems disappear permanently. We have documentation recordings, witness statements, and now live video evidence watched by over 50,000 people in real time. Amanda continued. If you attempt to contest this termination through your union or the courts, we will file countersuit for damages to Skyline's reputation and pursue criminal harassment charges against you personally. She handed him a business card with the law firm's letterhead clearly visible. We represent clients with unlimited resources and perfect legal records, Mr. Mitchell. Your 25 years of harassment complaints represent a liability we can quantify in exact dollar amounts. I strongly recommend accepting termination gracefully, rather than discovering what aggressive litigation looks like when deployed by people who can afford the best attorneys in the country. Jake Thompson attempted to salvage his own career through immediate distancing. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice shaking with desperation, "I want to resign. I should have stopped him. I failed as a human being and as an officer." Diana studied him with the clinical assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating character under pressure. "You're not resigning, Mr. Thompson. You're being demoted to flight simulation training for 6 months to learn leadership, human decency, and the courage to intervene when you witness wrongdoing. If you pass the evaluation, both technical and ethical, you can keep your wings," Diana continued. "If you ever enable harassment or discrimination again, you'll be terminated permanently with a record that ensures you never work in aviation again." Jake nodded frantically, understanding that he was being offered a level of mercy he didn't deserve and certainly hadn't earned. Sofia Rodriguez approached hesitantly, tears streaming down her face as she realized she was being offered an opportunity she had never dared to imagine. "Miss Carter," she whispered, "I should have said something sooner. I was scared of losing my job, but that's no excuse for letting passengers be treated this way." Diana's expression softened as she looked at the young woman, whose fear had been visible throughout Mitchell's performance. "Sophia, I'm creating a new position, Director of Passenger Rights and Advocacy. I need someone who understands what it's like to feel powerless, who can build airlines where employees never have to choose between their paychecks and their principles. The position comes with a 40% salary increase, direct reporting to executive management, and a mandate to ensure that discrimination complaints are investigated immediately and transparently." Diana continued, "Will you help me build the company culture we should have had all along?" Sophia's tears intensified as she nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her career prospects and the opportunity to protect other passengers from experiencing what she had witnessed for 2 years. Emma Walsh stepped forward, her shame visible but her voice steady. "I should have protected the passengers you've terrorized over the years," she said to Mitchell's crumbling form. "I should have filed formal complaints, regardless of retaliation threats." She turned to Diana with the expression of someone seeking redemption. "I want to lead sensitivity training for all crew members. I want to help build the culture where speaking up is rewarded rather than punished." Diana nodded approvingly. "You'll head our new crew advocacy program, reporting directly to Sophia. Your experience with institutional silence makes you qualified to teach others how to find their courage before it's too late." Marcus's live stream was now reaching 75,000 viewers, with major news networks beginning to interrupt regular programming to report on the unprecedented corporate accountability playing out in real time at Denver International Airport. The transformation was happening with the speed and decisiveness that Diana Carter had built her reputation on. In less than 10 minutes, she had dismantled a culture of protected harassment, fired its primary perpetrator, restructured reporting arrangements, and created new positions designed to prevent future discrimination. But she wasn't finished. The security officers who had been summoned by Mitchell's fraudulent complaint arrived just as Diana was establishing her authority over the situation. The lead officer approached with the wary expression of someone who had walked into a situation more complex than initially reported. "Officers," Diana said, addressing them with calm authority, "I'm Diana Carter, majority owner of Skyline Airways. This man," she gestured toward Mitchell, "called you here under false pretenses, claiming I was a disruptive passenger when I was actually documenting his harassment of customers and crew members." She handed the lead officer her corporate identification and acquisition documents. "I'll need you to escort Mr. Mitchell from airline property immediately. His employment has been terminated for cause and he's no longer authorized to be in secure areas of the airport." The officer examined her credentials, cross-referenced them with the corporate database, and nodded professionally. "Yes, ma'am. Sir, you'll need to come with us." Mitchell's final moments as an airline captain were spent being escorted through the terminal he had dominated for decades, his uniform stripped of authority, his credentials confiscated, his reputation destroyed by his own documented behavior. Diana watched him go without satisfaction or vindictiveness. Justice, she understood, wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that the system changed enough to protect future victims from experiencing what she had endured. The power reveal was complete. Captain Mitchell had learned too late that true power doesn't announce itself with uniforms and authority displays. True power operates quietly until the moment it chooses to create consequences that reshape entire institutions. And Diana Carter was just getting started. The security escort of Captain Ryan Mitchell through Denver International Airport was unlike any termination in aviation history. As the officers led him away from Gate B-27, his uniform, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, had become a costume, advertising his downfall. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves, symbols of rank that had protected him for 25 years, now marked him as the disgraced pilot being removed from his own aircraft. Marcus Rivera's live stream captured every step of Mitchell's humiliation, his narration barely containing his amazement. "Y'all, this is the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. This pilot just got fired by the woman he was discriminating against, and it turns out she owns the airline." The viewer count had exploded to 85,000, with comments flooding the screen faster than anyone could read them. Justice served in real time. This is what accountability looks like. I'm literally crying watching this. Never mess with a black woman's money. Mitchell's face had taken on the grayish pallor of someone experiencing complete cardiovascular shock. His breathing was shallow and rapid sweat soaking through his uniform shirt despite the airport's air conditioning. The man who had spent decades wielding power over others was discovering what powerlessness felt like. "Diana, please," he gasped, as the security officers guided him past the gate area where dozens of passengers were recording his departure. "Ms. Carter, I have kids in college, a mortgage, retirement planning, 25 years of service. This will destroy my family." Diana's expression remained unmoved as she responded with the clinical precision of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "You should have considered your family before you spent decades harassing women, terrorizing passengers, and creating hostile workplaces for everyone around you." She gestured toward Sofia Rodriguez, who was still processing her sudden promotion from terrorized gate agent to director of passenger rights. "This young woman has been afraid to come to work for 2 years because of your behavior. How many others like her have you driven away from careers they deserved?" Mitchell's response was the predictable deflection of someone who had never been forced to confront the human cost of his actions. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was just doing my job, maintaining standards, keeping order." "Maintaining standards?" Diana's voice carried across the gate area with the authority of a judge delivering a verdict. "You called passengers cattle. You asked flight attendants if they got their uniforms in the children's department. You questioned black passengers' tickets because you assumed they must be fraudulent." She opened his personnel file again and pulled out a specific complaint. "In 2020, you told a Hispanic family that language barriers affected flight safety and suggested they should learn English or take Greyhound." The specific citation hit Mitchell like a physical blow because he remembered the incident clearly. He had convinced himself it was reasonable caution rather than ethnic discrimination, part of the elaborate mental gymnastics that allowed him to maintain his self-image while abusing others. Officer Diana said to the lead security guard, "Mr. Mitchell is no longer employed by Skyline Airways. His credentials have been revoked, his access to secure areas terminated, and his identification badges confiscated. He needs to be processed as a civilian and escorted to public areas immediately." The officer nodded and began the standard procedure for removing terminated airline employees from restricted airport zones. Mitchell's company identification was cut up on the spot. His access cards were confiscated. His uniform pins and wings were removed and placed in an evidence bag. The psychological impact was devastating. Mitchell had defined himself through his airline identity for 25 years. Watching his credentials being destroyed in real time was like watching his entire sense of self being methodically dismantled. Sofia Rodriguez approached Diana with tears still streaming down her face, but her voice was stronger than it had been in months. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I want to thank you, but more than that, I want to promise you that this will never happen again. Not on my watch." Diana smiled warmly at the young woman whose courage to document Mitchell's behavior had provided crucial evidence of his discrimination. "Sophia, your first assignment as Director of Passenger Rights is to review every complaint filed against every crew member in the past 5 years. I want to know how many Mitchell-style situations we've been ignoring. You'll have unlimited authority to investigate, unlimited access to personnel files, and a direct reporting line to me personally." Diana continued. "No manager, no union representative, no corporate attorney can override your authority to protect passengers and crew members from harassment." Sophia's transformation was visible in real time. Her shoulders straightened, her voice grew stronger, her expression shifted from fearful to determined. "I won't let you down," she said. "I won't let anyone down ever again." Jake Thompson stood nearby, his nervous energy replaced by the stillness of someone who understood he was being offered redemption he hadn't earned. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve mercy. I enabled his behavior for 3 years because I was afraid of retaliation." "You're right," Diana replied with clinical honesty. "You did enable discrimination because you prioritized your career comfort over other people's dignity. That's exactly why you're going back to training." She handed him a business card for Skyline's new ethics training program. 6 months of leadership development, unconscious bias training, bystander intervention, education, and moral courage exercises. You'll be evaluated not just on technical skills, but on your ability to protect people who can't protect themselves. If you pass, you'll be qualified to mentor other crew members who struggle with finding their voice when they witness wrongdoing, Diana continued. If you fail, you'll be terminated with a record that ensures you never work in aviation again. Those are your choices. Jake nodded gratefully, understanding that accountability was a gift when administered by someone interested in redemption rather than revenge. Emma Walsh approached with the expression of someone who had been carrying guilt for years and finally saw an opportunity to transform it into action. "I've been complicit in this culture for 15 years, she said. "I've watched passengers be mistreated and stayed silent to protect my job security." Diana studied the senior flight attendant with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to evaluating character under pressure. "That's exactly why you're qualified to lead cultural change, Emma. People who have never been complicit don't understand how institutional pressure works. Your job is to create training programs that give crew members the tools to intervene effectively when they witness discrimination." Diana continued. "You'll teach them how to de-escalate situations, how to document incidents properly, how to protect vulnerable passengers without escalating conflicts." Emma nodded with the determination of someone who had found her purpose. "I'll make sure no one else has to experience what I witnessed today." Patricia Hayes, the elderly passenger who had recorded Mitchell's behavior, approached Diana with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a masterclass in accountability. "My dear," she said, "I've been flying first class for 40 years, and I've seen too many situations like this where powerful people faced no consequences for terrible behavior." She handed Diana a business card with her contact information. "I sit on the boards of 3 major charitable foundations, and we discuss corporate responsibility regularly. I'd like to nominate Skyline Airways for our Ethical Leadership Award, assuming you follow through on these promises." Diana accepted the card graciously. "Mrs. Hayes, the real test isn't what we promised today. It's whether passengers next month feel safer and more respected than passengers felt yesterday. Judge us by our sustained actions, not our immediate responses. The airport security officers completed Mitchell's processing and prepared to escort him to the public terminal areas. His transformation from authority figure to dismissed employee was complete, but Diana wasn't finished with institutional accountability. She turned to address the growing crowd of passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing stakeholders and media representatives. "What you witnessed today was not an isolated incident. It was the result of institutional culture that protected harmful behavior because it was profitable to ignore discrimination complaints. That culture ends today." Marcus's live stream was now reaching 120,000 viewers as major news networks prepared special reports on the unprecedented corporate accountability happening in real time. Skyline Airways will implement immediate policy changes, Diana announced. Anonymous reporting arrangements with direct access to executive leadership. Mandatory bias training for all employees updated annually. Zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination with immediate termination for violations. She paused to ensure her words were being recorded clearly by multiple devices. More importantly, we're establishing a victim compensation fund for anyone who experienced discrimination on Skyline flights in the past 5 years. We're not just changing our policies, we're accepting responsibility for our failures. The announcement sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. No airline had ever voluntarily established a compensation fund for discrimination victims. Diana was creating precedent that would pressure other carriers to address their own cultural problems proactively. Mitchell's final moments at Denver International Airport were spent in a holding area while paperwork was processed for his removal from airline property. Through the window, he could see the aircraft he would never command again, the crew who would never respect him again, the terminal where his authority had been stripped away permanently. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from union representatives, employment attorneys, and reporters who had gotten wind of the viral video. But Mitchell was discovering that viral shame provided no protection from consequences that social media documentation made traditional defensive strategies impossible. Diana watched the security officers escort Mitchell toward the terminal exit, feeling neither satisfaction nor vindictiveness. Justice, she understood, wasn't about punishment. It was about preventing future victims from experiencing the harassment that had been normalized under Mitchell's reign of terror. The immediate consequences were complete. Mitchell was gone. His enablers were either fired or undergoing remediation. His victims were being promoted to positions where they could protect others. The institutional culture that had protected him was being dismantled in real time. But Diana Carter wasn't interested in temporary fixes or symbolic gestures. She was planning changes that would transform not just Skyline Airways, but the entire aviation industry's approach to workplace discrimination. The revolution was just beginning. Within 4 hours of Mitchell's termination, Diana Carter had convened an emergency virtual board meeting that would fundamentally reshape how Skyline Airways operated. The live-streamed confrontation had reached 2.3 million views across multiple platforms, generating both crisis and opportunity that demanded immediate institutional response. The board meeting, conducted from Skyline's executive lounge at Denver International Airport, included 12 board members appearing on screens from across the country. Diana's opening statement was delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to corporate warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a culture crisis that requires immediate and permanent structural changes." She presented the financial reality with brutal clarity. Captain Mitchell's behavior has created legal liability exceeding $40 million in potential discrimination settlements. Our stock price has dropped 12% in the past 4 hours. Customer service complaints have increased 340% since the video went viral. But Diana framed the crisis as transformation opportunity. However, we also have a chance to demonstrate industry leadership in cultural accountability. We can become the airline that passengers trust because we've proven we prioritize human dignity over protecting problematic employees. Board member Harrison Clark, A 70-year-old traditionalist who had initially opposed Diana's acquisition raised concerns about union retaliation and precedent-setting terminations. Diana firing Mitchell without following standard grievance procedures could trigger industry-wide union resistance. Diana's response was immediate and definitive. Harrison, we didn't fire Mitchell for standard misconduct. We terminated him for federal civil rights violations captured on video and witnessed by thousands of people. His union contract doesn't protect discrimination, and if it did, we'd negotiate new contracts. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, the Mitchell Protocol. Zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination, immediate termination for violations, mandatory bias training for all employees, anonymous reporting arrangements with executive oversight, and victim compensation funds for historical wrongs. Board member Sarah Martinez. Skyline's former head of human resources expressed concerns about the financial cost. Diana comprehensive cultural transformation could cost hundreds of millions in training compensation and operational changes. Sarah Diana replied. Mitchell's behavior alone has cost us $40 million in potential settlements, $12 million in stock value today, and incalculable damage to brand reputation. Prevention costs less than litigation. The board vote was unanimous, immediate implementation of the Mitchell Protocol across all Skyline operations, with Diana authorized to make any personnel changes necessary to ensure cultural transformation. Within 24 hours, Diana had established the Carter Center for Aviation Excellence within Skyline's headquarters, a dedicated facility for training all employees in inclusive customer service, bystander intervention, and cultural competency. The center was named not for ego, but to ensure that Mitchell's legacy would be permanently associated with accountability rather than discrimination. Sofia Rodriguez's first action as Director of Passenger Rights was reviewing every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years. What she discovered was devastating. 247 complaints had been filed against 89 different employees, but only 12 had resulted in any disciplinary action. The pattern revealed institutional resistance to accountability that extended far beyond Mitchell's individual behavior. Ms. Carter Sophia reported during her first weekly briefing, "We didn't have one bad captain. We had a culture designed to protect bad behavior and punish people who reported it." Diana authorized Sophia to hire a team of 12 investigators with unlimited access to personnel files, complaint records, and employee interview data. Their mandate was simple: identify every employee who had engaged in discriminatory behavior and every manager who had enabled it through inaction. The investigation revealed problems throughout Skyline's organizational structure. Flight operations had suppressed 67% of harassment complaints to avoid disrupting crew scheduling. Gate services had transferred complaining employees rather than disciplining reported harassers. Customer service had classified discrimination complaints as misunderstandings to avoid federal reporting requirements. Diana's response was swift and comprehensive. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing personnel." 37 employees were terminated within the first month, including 2 regional managers who had buried complaints and 1 union representative who had negotiated protection for discriminatory behavior. Every termination was documented legally defensible and accompanied by detailed explanations of cultural expectations moving forward. But Diana understood that lasting change required positive reinforcement alongside accountability. She promoted 23 employees who had previously been marginalized for reporting discrimination or challenging inappropriate behavior. Their promotions sent a clear message that cultural courage would be rewarded rather than punished. Emma Walsh's Crew Advocacy Program became the industry standard for addressing workplace harassment in high-pressure environments. Her training modules focused on practical intervention strategies that allowed crew members to protect passengers without escalating conflicts or compromising safety. The key, Emma explained to trainees, is understanding that passenger dignity and operational efficiency aren't competing priorities. They're complementary goals that reinforce each other. Her program included role-playing exercises where crew members practiced intervening in discrimination scenarios, de-escalation techniques for managing hostile passengers, and communication strategies for reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. Within 6 months, Skyline's employee satisfaction scores increased 340%, with crew members reporting that they felt empowered to do their jobs properly without fear of retaliation from supervisors who prioritized avoiding complaints over addressing legitimate concerns. Marcus Rivera's live-stream documentation of Mitchell's behavior became a Harvard Business School case study in crisis management and social media accountability. The video was viewed over 15 million times across all platforms, generating discussion about workplace discrimination that extended far beyond aviation. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences about the power of social media documentation in creating institutional accountability. Sometimes he explained to audiences, the most important thing you can do is point a camera at injustice and let the world decide what they think about it. His documentation had created evidence that made Mitchell's termination legally bulletproof and socially supported. Traditional discrimination complaints often became he said, she said disputes that institutions could dismiss. Video evidence of harassment made denial impossible and created public pressure for meaningful change. The ripple effects extended throughout the aviation industry. United Airlines implemented new discrimination reporting procedures after pilots' unions questioned whether their own complaint arrangements were adequate. Delta created bystander intervention training programs after flight attendants requested tools for addressing passenger harassment. American Airlines established victim compensation funds similar to Skyline's model. Diana's approach became known as the Skyline Standard, Immediate Accountability for Discriminatory Behavior. Review of historical complaints, compensation for previous victims, and cultural transformation that prioritized human dignity alongside operational efficiency. 6 months after Mitchell's termination, Skyline Airways won the National Aviation Ethics Award for industry leadership in cultural accountability. The award ceremony included testimonials from passengers who described feeling safer and more respected on Skyline flights than on any other carrier. But the most meaningful transformation was visible in the day-to-day experiences of passengers and crew members. Sophia Rodriguez, now Director of Passenger Rights with a team of 8 advocates, received thank you letters from passengers who experienced helpful, respectful service that would have been unimaginable under Mitchell's cultural influence. Emma Walsh's training programs had created crew members who intervened effectively when they witnessed inappropriate behavior, protected vulnerable passengers proactively, and created inclusive environments where everyone felt welcomed, regardless of appearance or background. Jake Thompson completed his 6-month rehabilitation program and returned to flight duties as a transformed leader. His experience with consequences had taught him the importance of moral courage in preventing others from experiencing what he had enabled through his silence. His first flight back included an incident where a passenger made inappropriate comments about a Muslim family's appearance. Instead of staying silent as he had for years, Jake addressed the situation immediately. "Sir, that language isn't acceptable on this aircraft. All passengers deserve respectful treatment." The intervention prevented escalation and protected a family from harassment that might previously have gone unaddressed. Jake understood that his redemption was measured not by his personal comfort, but by his willingness to protect others when it mattered. Patricia Hayes became an advocate for corporate accountability within her social circles, using her influence among wealthy frequent flyers to support airlines that demonstrated genuine commitment to cultural change. Her networks represented exactly the customers that airlines needed to retain, and her endorsement of Skyline's transformation encouraged other passengers to choose carriers based on ethical reputation rather than just convenience. The financial results of Diana's cultural transformation exceeded all projections. Skyline's stock price recovered within 3 months and reached historical highs by year-end as investors recognized that ethical corporate culture created sustainable competitive advantages. Customer satisfaction ratings improved 89% as passengers experienced service that prioritized their dignity alongside operational efficiency. Employee retention improved 67% as crew members felt empowered to provide excellent service without fear of retaliation from supervisors who valued avoiding complaints over addressing legitimate concerns. Most importantly, discrimination complaints decreased 94% across all Skyline operations, as cultural change eliminated the conditions that had previously enabled harassment. The few complaints that were filed were investigated immediately, resolved transparently, and used as learning opportunities rather than problems to be buried. Diana's personal reputation evolved from successful businesswoman to industry reformer, but she remained focused on measurable outcomes rather than public recognition. The goal, she explained to journalists, isn't to be celebrated for fixing discrimination. The goal is to eliminate discrimination so completely that fixing it becomes unnecessary. Mitchell's termination had created a precedent that extended throughout the aviation industry and beyond. Other businesses began reviewing their own complaint arrangements, questioning whether they were protecting employees or enabling harmful behavior that created legal liability and cultural toxicity. Employment attorneys reported increased interest in discrimination prevention rather than just litigation defense. Corporate executives requested training on cultural accountability rather than just legal compliance. Human resources departments implemented proactive rather than reactive approaches to harassment prevention. The transformation represented more than individual justice for Diana or consequences for Mitchell. It demonstrated that institutional change was possible when accountability was immediate, comprehensive, and supported by leadership with the power to enforce cultural standards effectively. 1 year after the incident at Gate B-27, Diana received a letter from a young black woman who had been inspired to pursue an aviation career after watching the viral video of Mitchell's termination. "Seeing you stand up for yourself and then protect others made me believe that the industry could change," the letter read. "Thank you for making space for people like me." Similar letters arrived from crew members, passengers, and other business leaders who had implemented cultural changes in their own organizations after studying Skyline's transformation model. Diana's approach had created a blueprint for institutional accountability that extended far beyond aviation. The Carter Center for Aviation Excellence began offering consulting services to other airlines seeking to address their own cultural problems proactively rather than reactively. The center's success demonstrated that preventing discrimination was more efficient than managing its consequences. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of change was the absence of viral videos showing Skyline employees discriminating against passengers. The culture Diana had built made such incidents not just unthinkable but structurally impossible through training, accountability, and support for employees who protected vulnerable customers. Mitchell's legacy became permanently associated with the consequences of harassment rather than the tolerance of discriminatory behavior. His termination marked the beginning of industry-wide recognition that technical competence without human decency was insufficient for leadership positions that affected other people's lives. The institutional changes Diana implemented outlasted her direct involvement and became permanent features of Skyline's corporate culture. Future employees were trained not just in operational procedures, but in the ethical foundations that made excellent service possible. The transformation was complete, permanent, and expanding. Diana Carter had proven that sometimes the most important business decision is the willingness to prioritize human dignity over short-term convenience, and that accountability creates sustainable, competitive advantages that benefit everyone involved. Justice had been served, but more importantly, justice had been institutionalized. 1 year later, Diana Carter stood in the same spot at Gate B-27 where Captain Mitchell had tried to humiliate her. She was dressed similarly. Jeans, a comfortable sweater, minimal makeup, but the atmosphere around her was completely transformed. Sofia Rodriguez, now a confident leader rather than a terrified gate agent, greeted her warmly as passengers moved through the boarding process with genuine smiles and respectful efficiency. The young woman working Sofia's old position was helping an elderly passenger navigate mobility requirements with patience and dignity. A pilot walking through the gate area nodded respectfully to every passenger, his crew following his example of inclusive professionalism. The culture Diana had built was visible in every interaction, every gesture, every moment where staff chose kindness over indifference. Watching a young black girl in a Harvard hoodie board first class without incident, Diana felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had transformed pain into permanent change. The teenager moved confidently through the priority lane, her boarding pass accepted with the same courtesy extended to every passenger regardless of appearance or background. This is what change looks like, Diana thought to herself. Not dramatic moments of confrontation, but thousands of small interactions where dignity is assumed rather than earned, where respect is universal rather than conditional. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Rivera, who was now completing his final semester of law school and had been accepted to Harvard Law's Civil Rights program. "Flying Skyline today," his text read. "Crew member told me about the passenger rights policy and how proud they are to work for a company that protects people. Thought you'd want to know the culture is still strong." Diana smiled as she boarded the aircraft, remembering the scared young man who had live-streamed Mitchell's discrimination because he understood that injustice required documentation. Marcus had transformed his social media influence into advocacy for institutional accountability, inspiring other young people to use their platforms for social change rather than just entertainment. In the first-class cabin, she took her seat and opened her laptop to review quarterly reports showing that Skyline's commitment to cultural excellence had generated sustainable competitive advantages. Customer loyalty was at historical highs. Employee satisfaction exceeded industry standards. Stock performance reflected investor confidence in ethical business practices. But the numbers told only part of the story. The real measure of success was visible in the flight attendant who helped passengers with genuine warmth, the pilot who made safety announcements with respect rather than condescension, the crew members who worked together as professionals united by shared values rather than fear of retaliation. As the aircraft lifted off from Denver, Diana reflected on the journey that had begun with Mitchell's discrimination and evolved into industry-wide transformation. She had received letters from passengers across the country describing improved experiences on airlines that had adopted Skyline standards for cultural accountability. Employment attorneys reported that discrimination complaints were decreasing industry-wide as companies implemented proactive rather than reactive approaches to harassment prevention. Business schools were teaching case studies of cultural transformation that emphasized prevention over litigation. Most importantly, young people from underrepresented backgrounds were entering aviation careers in record numbers, inspired by evidence that the industry was changing to welcome their talents and protect their dignity. Diana's mother had passed away 3 months earlier, but not before seeing her daughter's picture in Time magazine's feature on business leaders who had transformed corporate culture through moral courage. Rosa Carter had kept the magazine on her kitchen table, showing visitors the photo of her daughter accepting the National Aviation Ethics Award. "She always said some people would try to make me small," Diana had told the hospice nurse. "But she also taught me that changing structures was more important than changing minds. You can't force people to respect you, but you can build organizations where disrespect has consequences." The flight to Miami passed smoothly with crew members providing service that prioritized passenger dignity alongside operational efficiency. Diana observed interactions that would have been impossible under Mitchell's cultural influence: respectful assistance for passengers with disabilities, patient help for travelers with language barriers, kind attention for nervous flyers, regardless of their appearance. The transformation had required more than firing one problematic captain. It had demanded changes in hiring practices, training programs, accountability arrangements, and leadership development that prioritized character alongside competence. But the investment had generated returns that extended far beyond Skyline Airways. Other industries had adopted similar approaches to cultural accountability, creating workplaces where harassment was prevented rather than managed, where dignity was assumed rather than negotiated. As the aircraft descended toward Miami, Diana received a final text message that perfectly captured the meaning of everything she had accomplished. It was from Sofia Rodriguez. Just got promoted to Vice President of Passenger Experience. 5 years ago, I was afraid to come to work. Today, I'm responsible for ensuring no one else ever feels that way. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Diana closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city below, thinking about all the passengers who would fly safely and respectfully because institutional change had made discrimination unthinkable rather than just punishable. Captain Mitchell's attempt to humiliate one passenger had accidentally created permanent transformation that protected millions of travelers. His harassment had been replaced by respect. His culture of fear had been replaced by a culture of dignity. The aircraft touched down smoothly, piloted by professionals who understood that technical excellence required human excellence, that safety included emotional safety, that true leadership meant protecting vulnerable people rather than exploiting them. Diana Carter had proven that sometimes the most important response to discrimination is not immediate retaliation, but patient documentation, followed by comprehensive institutional change. She had transformed personal humiliation into permanent protection for everyone who came after her. Justice, she understood, wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that future generations would inherit arrangements designed to recognize their humanity rather than question their worthiness. The sky belonged to everyone. Diana Carter had made sure it would remain that way. If this story moved you, it's because you understand that dignity isn't negotiable. The next time you witness someone being treated unfairly, remember that your response, whether it's speaking up, documenting injustice, or simply refusing to laugh along, shapes the world we all share. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves respect. Subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just served but permanently established. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that sometimes the person you're looking down on is the one who holds the power to lift everyone else up. Remember to drop your city in the comments and let me know what you would have done in Diana's situation. Would you have revealed your identity immediately or waited like she did? Your thoughts matter, and I read every single comment. True strength doesn't announce itself with uniforms or authority. It reveals itself in moments when someone chooses to protect others who cannot protect themselves. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand quietly with dignity while someone else destroys themselves with their own hatred. Thanks for watching, and remember to turn on notifications so you never miss a story of accountability, justice, and the power of refusing to be silenced. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, because you never know when your courage might change everything for someone else.